The ceasefire did not stop the war. It gave both sides 2 weeks to prepare for the possibility that the war would come back in a more dangerous form. That is the story, not the formal talk process, not the mediation language, not the vague idea that diplomacy is still alive as long as people keep saying the word diplomacy. The real story is that this 2-week pause increasingly looks less like a bridge to peace and more like a bridge to the next phase of conflict. And the reason is simple. When a ceasefire is real, you see behavior consistent with risk reduction. When a ceasefire is becoming hollow, you see behavior consistent with positioning. That is what the source material shows. Now, Iran is moving missiles. Iran is digging systems out of underground sites. Iran's own media is openly preparing the public for the possibility that war resumes. Trump says he expects bombing to resume. Dan Kane says U.S. forces are ready to resume major combat operations at a moment. Notice, assets keep flowing into theater. The mediator still does not know whether Iran will even fully commit to the next round. That is not de-escalation. That is a narrowing corridor between one round of war and the next. The most important image in the whole story is not a diplomat. In a suit, it is a missile transporter moving under time pressure. Because missile movement tells you more than speeches do, missiles only get rushed to new launch points when the people controlling them think those launch points may soon matter. Missiles only get dug out from buried sites when the people controlling them believe delay may soon be more dangerous than exposure. Missiles only get dispersed when the side holding them thinks the next strike may be coming, and when it wants those missiles survivable, launchable, and ready before the bombers arrive. That is the logic of war preparation, not peace preparation. And the source makes that logic explicit. Iran believes the war may restart, so it wants the weapons somewhere they can be used before the next U.S. wave can destroy them. That is the first layer. The second layer is what this means for the entire diplomatic structure. Most people still think diplomacy fails when negotiators cannot close the final gap at the table. That is too simplistic in conflicts like this. Diplomacy really begins failing when both sides start acting as if military timing matters more than diplomatic sequencing. That is where we are. Now, Pakistan is still trying to hold the process together. Islamabad is under lockdown. The city is waiting. The Iranians may come or may not. The Americans are there, the mediators are in motion. On paper, this still looks like a negotiation, but real negotiations require at least one invisible ingredient. Both sides must still believe the time between now and the next meeting is safer than the next meeting failing. Once that belief begins to disappear, diplomacy becomes hollow very quickly, and that belief appears to be disappearing. Now, Iran is not using the pause to signal military restraint. It is using the pause to restore military options. The United States is not using the pause to reduce regional posture. It is using the pause to improve readiness and preserve strike flexibility. That means the interval between talks is no longer neutral ground. It is contested preparation time. That is the point most people are missing, and once you understand that, several other details snap into place. Take Hormuz. Iran is still insisting on control, tolls, reparations, and political authority in the strait. At first glance, that can look like ordinary bargaining maximalism. It is more than that. Hormuz has become the place where Iran is trying to preserve relevance, even as military pressure and blockade squeeze everything else. A regime that feels stable uses leverage selectively. A regime that feels cornered uses leverage as identity. That is the difference. Now, Iran is not just talking about Hormuz because it wants a better deal. It is talking about Hormuz because the Strait is one of the last places where geography still lets Iran change the behavior of everyone else. If the regime cannot dictate the wider battlefield, it can still try to make the world pay attention through the choke point. That is what makes this so dangerous, because once a weakened regime concentrates its leverage in one place, that leverage tends to become more volatile. It stops being one bargaining card among many. It becomes the card that has to prove the regime still matters. That is late-stage leverage. And late-stage leverage rarely produces moderation. Now add the blockade. The blockade is not just strangling movement, it is also changing political time. Every extra day it holds, Tehran has more reason to believe that waiting passively is worse than preparing actively. Every extra day it holds, Washington has more reason to ask whether it should hit before missile repositioning and underground recovery. Go further, that is the core trap of this phase. The ceasefire was supposed to lower pressure. Instead, pressure may now be changing shape. Instead of direct combat pressure, both sides are living inside anticipatory pressure. Iran asks if the bombing is likely to resume anyway. Why would we leave missiles exposed or buried and unusable? The US asks if Iran is using this pause to hide missiles, reposition assets, and absorb suspected outside help. Why would we wait until those assets are better protected? That is how pauses become dangerous. Not because one side openly cancels them, because both sides start interpreting the passage of time as an advantage for the other side. That is what the suspected Chinese cargo detail adds to the picture. A seized ship's secret cargo belief that the material involved missile-related components from China. Whether every detail becomes publicly verified or not, the strategic meaning is clear enough. Washington believes Iran is not simply sitting inside a ceasefire. Washington believes Iran is still trying to preserve, restore, or expand the means to keep fighting. That destroys trust. And once trust is gone, even routine movements become escalatory. A ship is not just a ship, it becomes resupply. A transporter is not just a transporter. It becomes target movement. A training flight is not just a training flight, it becomes a signal. That is why the B-52 flight matters. That is why the Globemaster flights matter. That is why the Ford Group matters. That is why the refueling tankers matter. Each piece says the same thing. The United States is not speaking from a cold, hypothetical posture. It is speaking from inside a live operational posture. That is exactly why Trump's language about expecting the bombing to resume was so significant. It was not just a negotiating bluff. It was a statement made from inside an already prepared military geometry. That means the next decision, if it comes, will not come out of nowhere. It will come out of a battlefield that both sides have already spent 2 weeks reshaping. That is why this moment is actually more dangerous than the day the original bombing campaign began. At the opening of a war, the system is shocked. In a failing ceasefire, the system is calculating. Calculation can be more dangerous than shock because both sides have had time to study losses, move assets, harden preferences, and decide what they cannot afford to lose in the next round. For Iran, that appears to be missiles, launch flexibility, and Hormuz leverage. For the United States, that appears to be initiative, strike timing, and the ability to hit before Iran regains more of its posture. Those priorities do not point toward peace. They point toward the logic of a second round. And once that logic takes hold, diplomats are no longer steering the crisis. They are running behind it. That is what Islamabad now looks like. A city under lockdown waiting for negotiators, while the real movement is happening in missile sites, ship corridors, and strike plans. That does not mean talks are impossible. It means talks are no longer controlling the tempo. The military actors are. That is the deeper reason the ceasefire feels so hollow. It still exists procedurally. But strategically, it is being eaten from underneath by missile movement, by blockade pressure, by public signaling, by force buildups, by mutual suspicion, and by the basic fact that both sides are now preparing for the possibility that what comes after the deadline may not be another meeting, but another campaign. That is the real story. The ceasefire did not stop the war. It gave both sides a short, dangerous period in which to decide what they most needed to preserve before the war potentially came back. Iran chose missiles, launch points, and Hormuz leverage. America chose readiness, mass, and strike flexibility. Those choices tell you more than any diplomatic statement. They tell you that the clock is no longer working for peace. It is working for whoever can best prepare before the pause ends. And that is why this crisis now feels like it is standing on the edge of something larger. Not because people are using dramatic rhetoric, because both sides have begun acting as if the more credible future is not settlement, but renewed force.